Hey everyone, I'm Sven Mawson, and I'm here to talk to you about why Istio is for everyone. So this talk is really about clearing up some of the misconceptions about Istio that we've seen over the years, and to try to convince you that you should actually use Istio if you're not using it yet. So first, I'm going to talk about some of those common misconceptions we hear, and then I'll go into sort of what we've been doing about them and how they're not really true anymore. So the first one we hear is that Istio is really only for big, complicated systems. They have lots of moving parts. They need a big platform team, things like that. And this really isn't true anymore. It was true sort of in the early days of Istio, but we've fixed a lot of the problems and simplified things. So it's a lot easier to run. And also it's a lot more useful sort of for everything. So we also hear this thing about Kubernetes only, right? So people think, sure, if I'm using Kubernetes, I need Istio for it, but I don't need it for my VMs or bare metal machines. And that's not true anymore either. Istio actually started with Kubernetes, but we added VM support pretty early, and we've been improving on that pretty much every release to try and make it better. And it really helps VMs too, right? There's lots of good stuff in there that makes it easy for VMs. Okay, so the third misconception I want to talk about here is that Istio is just too hard. It's too hard to upgrade, it's too hard to manage, it's too hard to use. So it's just not worth it because it requires more effort than it's worth. That's not really true either. So I'll talk about a little bit of why that's so. Okay, so let's talk about why Istio really is for you and why it's useful for all these networked applications that you might have. So here's a list of some of the stuff that you get from Istio. The bold things here actually you get just by installing and configuring it, and really installing it and rolling out the data plane, I should say, not actually configuring it. So no configuration. You get mutual authentication and encryption. You get secure naming, which means that your clients actually do the authentication of the server and make sure the server is who it's supposed to be. You get client-side application telemetry, so the clients can report, what requests they're sending out, how long those requests take, what error rates they get, that kind of stuff. You also get application layer load balancing, right? So your load balancing happens at the application layer, which means every request is individually load balanced to servers, which gives you a lot better utilization and a lot better agility when something bad happens. So those are all, again, for free for client applications. So if you have a client application that is making outbound connections, installing Istio and rolling it out to that application will give you all of these features. If you want a couple other features, those you actually have to configure. So if you want, for example, circuit breaking, that has to be configured, although I really actually want us to figure out a way to roll that out by default. Fault injection, so for testing, be able to say, hey, I should throw a fault every 10th request, right? You have to configure that. That's not going to be automatic. We don't automatically inject faults. And then if you want to route traffic in a certain way, so if you want to say, okay, to this service, actually, let's send 10% over to this alpha version of it or something. If you want to configure that, you use a configuration file to do that. Use the management layer. So that's for client applications. What about for server applications? Well, same here. There's a lot of stuff that you get for free from Istio. So again, you get that mutual authentication and encryption, and you get the telemetry collection now on the server side. So you know how long requests to the server took, and how long they took to process, what error rates you had, things like that. Things that you have to add configuration for are things like authorization policies. I'll go into an example of that later. Again, that routing actually is also configurable kind of on the server side. And this is actually one of Istio's strengths, is that you can configure routing on both sides of a request. So clients can make some choices about where they want to send traffic, and actually servers can set up default choices. So a server can say, by default, 10% of the traffic that's coming sort of to my abstract service is going to be sent to my canary version, let's say. And that lets you get a lot of control and a lot of good properties like rollout safety and ability to roll things back quickly and things like that. And the last one actually that is on this list, although not the last one that Istio provides, is end user authentication and authorization. That's also going to require configuration. We don't set that up by default. You have to configure what users are allowed to access your service. We can't make that choice for you. So And of course, in both of these, there's a bunch of other features. This is just kind of the top of the list of things people get value from Istio for. Um, and really, we see, again, this is useful for all client or server applications. And really, no matter where they are, right? So not just in containers. They're also for VMs. They're also for bare metal machines. For serverless applications, Istio is actually really useful. And in fact, especially with Knative, you can kind of get some default support built in. And we're expanding this to other locations as well. So there's work to get Istio into IoT and mobile. There's work to expand it into other areas and to keep making it easier to use outside of just Kubernetes and containers. So that's about where Istio is useful. But then, how do we make Istio easier? Since we've been hearing so much that it's hard, and we want to debunk the myth that Istio is really hard to use. So we've made a lot of progress here. I'd say it's not quite 100% easy yet. It's 95% of the way there. We're making a lot of progress, and every release we're making improvements to the experience and trying to make it easier to use, easier to upgrade, easier to install and manage, easier to debug, things like that. So here's kind of the simplified view of Istio, and the interesting thing is that Istio now actually, as of 1.5, so over a year ago, I think now, Istio actually looks like its simplified view. So, the simplified view of Istio is kind of, you have a data plane, you have a control plane, and you have not shown the management plane, which is actually just Kubernetes for us. The Kubernetes API server acts as a place we store configuration. But the architecture is actually this simple now. So there's just the data plane. The control plane is a single deployment that you install, and it does everything. It manages discovery, it manages webhooks, it manages certificates. It does everything in one place, so you don't have to worry about managing a bunch of different parts. It's just a simple system. Okay, so what about installing it? So if we want to get Istio installed, it used to be pretty complicated. Now we have this single command that actually can install Istio into a cluster, and it's just istio install. That'll give you the default install. Obviously, there's lots of configuration options if you want to control it more, if you want to set up a different profile, you want to override things. There's a lot of controls, but those are only there if you need them. By default, it's just Istio install, and now you have your control plane up and running, and actually your management plane too, because again, it uses the Kubernetes API server. So we just install CRDs as part of this, and now you have those configuration objects, those configuration resources that you can use to set up Istio. So the data plane takes a little bit more work. You label the namespace that you want to use Istio for, and then you just apply your YAMLs, or if you already have things running in those namespaces, you can just restart them, and they'll pick up the data plane, and now you'll have Istio up and running. So, 2 or 3 commands, and you're good to go. Okay, so that's about installing Kubernetes, but as I said, Istio is meant to work everywhere. What about VMs? VMs are easy-ish. We made actually a bunch of progress here as well in the last couple of releases. We are making more progress. So here you just have to install the control plane in the same way we did before, but you have to actually expose a couple other things. You have to expose a gateway because the VMs are outside the cluster, so they need to get, and the control plane runs in a cluster. VMs need to talk to it, so there's a gateway. So you run a command to do that, and then you run a command to expose the control plane to it. So really, this is actually even harder than I'd like, but still, it's only 2 extra commands. It's not too bad. And then the data plane, again, is easy-ish. You set up you set up a workload group, which is a YAML that defines your VM and says the name of your VM and what labels to apply it. Run a command to generate config for that, copy that to the VM, and then run a command on the VM. And the last one actually is a placeholder as well. We have plans for that, but it's not released yet. So we're working on a continually better experience on VMs. This is not by any means hard, so I'd say it's still pretty easy, but we want to make it even easier. We want to get it to the place where it's as easy as Kubernetes is, where you just have kind of one command per VM to use it, and maybe one command per cluster per control plane to set it up and say, hey, I want VM support. So we're making this easier. It's easy. It's going to get even easier as the releases come along. So what about using Istio? So I mentioned before the authorization policy. I was going to talk about an example of that. So here it is. So this is an authorization policy. This is the entire thing that says who can talk to a particular application. And so the parts that I've colored are the sort of important parts here. The app details is defining the target. And actually, I guess I should have colored the namespace as well, because this is in the default namespace, the details application. That's the target of this rule. And it's saying, I want to allow calls to this, this application from a particular service account. And that's in green. That's the, you just list out the service account that you want to allow access from. And then you can define what operations. And in this case, we want to say, we want read application access. So we're saying methods get. And now once this is in place, that that particular service account can call the details service for read-only access, but not any other access. And one of the things we do is once you apply an authorization policy, it actually, if you start allowing certain things, it'll reject other things automatically. So you don't have to specify a separate sort of blanket reject rule that's kind of built into the system once you start applying things. So this is actually pretty simple to use. And, again, you can add a whole bunch more configuration. You can customize as much as you want. There's a lot of power here, but it doesn't mean that because it's powerful, it's really hard to use. We did a lot of research. A lot of efforts went into designing the user experience here to make it really easy and simple. So one other thing I'm actually really proud about the team delivering over the last, I should really say the community, since it's an effort across multiple companies. We've made upgrades much easier to do safely. So upgrades have been pretty easy. If you're just doing an in-place upgrade, you can kind of just, upgrade the control plane. But for a production system, that's kind of dangerous, right? You don't want to just make changes atomically, globally to all of your services. So this is how you would actually do a safe upgrade of Istio and roll it out in a safe way, but it's still pretty easy. So we actually added a pre-check command that'll give you warnings if there's problems. It'll tell you about anything to be worried about. So you can just run that to make sure you're good to go. You can then install the new version and you can give it a revision name. So in this case, we're installing the 1.11.2 release. We just tag it with that. Well, really, we label it with a revision, I should say, because tags are a little bit different. So once you've done that, you can actually, now you can tag it. And so tags are a new feature that we released. I forget which release now. It might have been 1.9 or 1.10. But tags let you basically give kind of an indirection to the installs so that the applications that are using Istio don't need to change every time you do an upgrade. So an application can just say, I want to use the stable, whatever that is, or I want to use Canary, whatever that is. And then separately, you can point Canary at a particular install. And so in this case, we're saying, okay, we're going to point Canary to the new revision. And then you can just roll out the new data plane and control plane, and they come together to a particular, in this case, namespace. So restart all deployments in a particular Canary namespace, make sure it works. And then you can keep doing that if you want to, as many things as you want to Canary, you can test it out. Once you're happy with it, you can then just go and change the production tag or the stable tag or whatever you want to call it to use the new revision. And that'll be, again, a single command that says, okay, point prod in this case at that 1.11.2 revision. And then I go and restart my deployments. And now they're all on prod. And again, I didn't have to go mess with those, the labels on them. And in fact, you don't really need to do the restart if you want to wait. There's, organic restarts that are happening in Kubernetes clusters, and you'll see, especially in managed services, that happens pretty often. So you can just tag it with the new version, and then just wait and see, monitor it, make sure it's going well. Once you've done that, once everything is on the new prod revision, you can go ahead and delete the old one. So you just do a Istio cuddle, uninstall that revision, and now you have, Istio upgraded in a completely safe way without individual application action, and it's a couple commands for each step, pretty easy to manage, pretty easy to do. I don't think actually we can get any simpler than this and still have it be safe. We are working on some, ways to maybe make the rollout of pods a little safer, but that's about it. You really don't get much easier than this. Okay, so that's how easy it is to upgrade, and that's how easy it is to use Istio. A lot of this, I just want to do a little shout out to the Istio community again. Every change in here that I talked about, every part that we made easier is because of a lot of hard work from the community. That includes the developers and the users giving us feedback. Every release Istio just keeps getting better and better. It's gotten easier to install, upgrade, and use. It's worked across more types of environments like containers, VMs, bare metals. And really, Istio is for everyone. It's for your client applications, your server applications. Sure, it's also for your complex microservices, but it's not just for those, it's for everything. So thank you again to the Istio community, our developers and users, and thank you for listening. And hopefully I've convinced you to try out Istio. If you see anything that's not as easy as you'd like it to be, give us feedback, let us know, and we'll work hard and we'll make it better. So thank you very much.